welcome to this ET Now special. I'm Nantara Rai, working from home. In the run-up to Union Budget on 1st of February, we bring you this special broadcast in partnership with the CII. Joining me now is the President of the CII and the top boss at Kotak Mahindra Bank, Uday Kotak. Mr. Kotak, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for agreeing to give this interview. It's being seen as a now or never budget. We're on the hunt for the economic vaccine, an antidote for India's economic growth. If I could begin this interview, Mr. Kotak, by asking you that are you all in industry also seeing this as a now or never budget, especially given the fact this government takes pride in saying it doesn't save all reforms for one day of the year?
You know, Nayantara, we should look at this as a budget in the backdrop of an event which has happened after 100 years, which is the pandemic. And from that point of view, whenever you have an event like this, it reminds us of a very simple point. These are the best of times, these are the worst of times. And therefore, our response has to be consistent with the times we live in. And in that context, this budget is an opportunity for us to look at the arithmetic of our finances and at the same time think about a policy vision into a structurally superior future. And that is how we need to think about this budget. And in that context, I think this is an opportunity for us to redefine our destiny in 5 important sectors: infrastructure, healthcare, defense, education, and sustainability. And sustainability is right there at the top. Keep in mind, there's a major change in the United States, which is also going to drive the sustainability agenda. So these are the 5 core sectors where we need to really get our act together for a stronger India.
So, Mr. Kotak, I'm going to ask you one question. I've asked another member of the CI Secretariat, Mr. Sanjeev Bajaj, and that is, when you focus on these 5 points, you know how they said in that movie Jerry Maguire, where is the money? Where is the money going to come for the central exchequer to make the kind of announcements that the public is hoping for?
So there are 2 big sources of revenue. One is the tax revenue and the second is the non-tax revenue. My view is, with reference to direct taxation and even indirect taxation, we need a stable tax regime. And what we have to hope and believe is that growth will give us some of the higher tax revenue. So that is one part. As far as where is the money on the non-tax revenue, time has come for us to really dramatically up the gears in our game on privatization. We should be bolder to say time has come to look at privatization in addition to disinvestment. Let it get the kind of focus which we saw in the Maggie Thatcher era in the US, where it was driven with a strong sense of purpose to transform the British economy from the challenges it faced. Can we go with a passion and a vigor to really go out there and monetize our assets in the right manner and a right process? Third is the huge amounts of land which government and quasi-government entities own. Why can't we find ways of monetizing that? Next is gold. The amount of gold India holds is mind-blowing. It's amongst the wealthiest nations in the world in terms of the amount of gold we hold. Therefore, between privatization, monetization of various assets owned by government and quasi-government entities, as also the whole area of gold, these are just some of the ideas where we can use non-tax revenues to significantly boost the question which you asked, where is the money?
You know, there has always been this belief that when you need to mobilize revenues, you should raise taxes. Though there are enough studies that show that the lower the tax regime, the more compliant the people are. Mr. Kotak, we're talking at a time when there is a lot of apprehension and fear that some kind of a COVID surcharge, a super rich tax, and estate tax can all be introduced in the budget. Is that how real is that apprehension, and will it work?
See, my view on this point, if there's some COVID surcharge, I think that's something which we can take in our stride. But we've got to very carefully think the framework which we want the future agenda for this country. Yes, inequality has grown. We need to address it. My answer to that is you counter inequality through making sectors and the Indian economy competitive. Do not allow monopolies, do not allow quasi-monopolies in different sectors to take shape. If you look at today, the amount of economic power in the hands of the few global quasi-dominant players, whether it's a Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, they basically control a lot of the world. We saw the challenge on Facebook wanting to intrude into privacy, and there was anxiety amongst most of us in India. So the answer to ensuring that we create a more equal and an equitable system is not to reduce the size of the cake, but to ensure that the cake is much more competitive, and that will itself lead to better distribution. We also need to keep in mind that there are many sectors where we have seen global dominance dominate the Indian scene. I am not necessarily saying that we are wanting protectionism, whether it's on investment or trade, but we also want to ensure that India remains truly self-confident and self-reliant. Therefore, how are we going to get the ability of domestic animal spirits combined with a competitive agenda and a competitive landscape? India should move towards allowing more competition, freeing up controls, and rather than being excessively concerned about short-term challenges to getting more money through taxation.
Okay, so to do that, when India wants to be Atmanirbhar, self-reliant, which is the agenda of this government, without raising taxes and staying competitive, Mr. Kotak, give us an example or two of how this can be done.
No, in my view, you just allow more competition. I think let there be more players in each sector, and ensure that there's a level playing. There is no sector where you have a disproportionate advantage for a player A versus player B.
You have also talked about disinvestment and privatization, the way the Margaret Thatcher government did it, where it was famously said the government has no business being in business. Mr. Kotak, do you think the political appetite exists to carry on with such reforms? For example, let's look at banks. It is the CII's recommendation also that we need to start having the government pare down its equity in banks, go below 51%. For that, you're going to have to amend the Banking Regulation Act. It's going to be at a time in the post-corona world where there will be fear about the unbanked are also being looked after. Is this the time to go for that reform?
In my view, ultimately, we are in the political economy. Therefore, as it is said, politics is the art of the possible. But we have a strong government which if it makes up its mind, it can make things and move things. And therefore, going below 50% through the public market route in a few banks is not dramatically reducing government ownership in public sector banking. Let there be 4 or 5 large public sector banks. In the balance, let the government ownership go below 50%, and let there be wider ownership of banks, and let unshackle the banks. We are into an era where consumer is king. The consumer will decide voting on his or her feet, and unless we get that competitive edge, forget public sector. We in private sector are concerned about the competitive edge we need to sustain and survive in the business, and we need to be far more alert than ever before. And therefore, in that kind of a competitive environment, it's important that government monetizes and does what is crucial for it, which is getting the money for the strategic sectors which we discussed right at the beginning of this meeting.
Absolutely. And Mr. Kotak, it has to be said that I remember during an interview you once said that you plead your friends in NBFCs and the banking sector at large all to start selling their shares, to offload equity, go in for large capital raising exercises. But if I could just stick with the banking sector at large, when you say that you don't need maybe more than 4 banks where the government has more than a 50% stake, what would these banks be? Obviously, one would be SBI.
The 4 merged banks which have been done, there are 4 large banks, or 4 or 5 large banks which have been created. Let those 4 or 5 large banks remain ambit. For the rest, find a path forward.
There is so much buzz going into 1st of February budget day. Once again, so much talk again about the bad bank concept. Is this the time for a bad bank? It's going to be so difficult to manage one. Do we need more than one bad bank? You have had personal experience of seeing also how difficult it is to get everybody on board to fix an NPA.
You need multiple bad banks. That's the model which CII has recommended, where you allow an alternative investment fund structure, which is permitted by SEBI, and through that get both global and domestic capital, and let it be used to clear out bad loans sitting in banks and NBFCs at a fair market clearing price. We have recommended multiple bad banks through this route, and we also recommend that in addition to buying securities, which is what SEBI structure allows, to allow these AIFs or bad banks, as we call them, to buy loans from banks and NBFCs as well. And that is something for which, if RBI and SEBI can work together and create a roadmap, we could have a ability of getting billions of dollars globally and domestic money to one shot in the next 12 to 24 months, clean up all the issues which we need to deal with as soon as possible.
Mr. Kotak, can I also begin by asking you that when you have this bad bank model, and I would imagine in the pandemic year, we will see NPAs rise. You yourself have been talking about it. A bad bank, multiple bad banks will still take time to set up, having the regulations come out for it to become effective. What can be done in the short term so this problem doesn't balloon and take the economy down?
Nayantara, there are already multiple alternate investment funds which are in business. They need certain areas for being allowed to buy loans from banks, and also some tax treatment issues. If some of these issues are done, we will see a huge amount of capital in the next few months directed at buying distressed loans.
Okay, now I would like to also ask you a little bit about the infrastructure space, because we come back to, where is the capital going to be? Enough has been said that for the economy to revive, we need to look at the GDP multipliers. We need to be Atmanirbhar. We need to boost domestic capital. What are your suggestions for the government on that front? Because the government alone can't do it, and the private sector has not been increasing its capex.
We at CII support creation of a domestic financial institution for infrastructure. I know our attempts in the past have not worked, and inevitably those infrastructure finance corporations have not worked. The answer to that is twofold. We need long-term debt capital to be made available, and a budgetary structure or a structure through RBI, through the priority sector route, needs to be put in place where this infrastructure finance institution gets long-term money of 7, 10, 12 years. Second, and this is a point which needs to be kept in mind, that we need to find ways by which sovereign entities, whether center or state, pay their dues in time and honor contracts, because no infrastructure can develop if sovereigns or quasi-sovereigns do not honor their contractual commitments.
Mr. Kotak, what we have also started seeing is manufacturing starting to come back. You and I have just talked a little bit about infrastructure and how a DFI can be set up and how it can be different and all of that. What will it take to get services back? We have been an economy reliant on services.
Nayantara, this is a favorite subject of mine. I believe India has a very good shot at becoming the office of the world. Not the back office of the world, the office of the world. COVID has taught us one thing. We can be anywhere and we can operate anywhere. Geography is history. Therefore, a Google engineer can be hired from a village in India if we have got the training, education, and the skills available with those people. So how are we going to create a massive skill and education development whereby our people are available as resources for providing services, not just to Indians and in India, but globally. And this is once in a lifetime opportunity.
But for that, you're going to have to need some support from the government, or is that not needed at all? Now it's going to
No,
be
I
up to the
think we have
corporations to get their act together if they want to recruit people, like you're saying, from the villages and to give them security protocols, etc.
I think if you look at our software services, they've done that. The time has come for us to build deeper linkages across sectors, whereby offices around the world can operate from a place in India. And they just have a little front end in New York or London or Paris or Tokyo. And the rest of the work is done from a place like India. And do it in a manner where we also get high quality jobs, engineers, accountants, even doctors, technologists, and really make that change of making India the office of the entire world.
So as India endeavors to become the office of the world, what we've also always seen is that during a crisis, you see new brands emerge, right? And they become powerhouses. You had once tweeted to that effect also during 2020. Mr. Kotak, in Budget 2021, as CII President, do you have high hopes from the Finance Minister when it comes to the new economy? The new economy has been thriving since the pandemic.
I have confidence that the government is focused on doing the right things from an Indian point of view. We as Indians need to do our bit to work with the government and particularly business and industry to make this COVID period as the best of times period for us. And this is a transformational point in our history where we sit, can we make that point? Can we make that change from the earlier era to the new era and grasp it with all the vigor? That's the opportunity, I believe. And it is not only the finance minister's job, it is the job of business, industry, civil society, and all of us to work together to create that new India and support the government of the day to the best of our ability.
As an industry veteran, one of the top bankers of the country, the president for the CII, you have given me 5 points that the budget must focus on. Do you think it's also a budget where you want, as an industrialist, tell us, want to see massive changes or you want to see directional?
I would measure some changes which need to be done now, some changes which need to be put on a path and to be made with a roadmap laid out so that we can make sure we can act on that path. And through that, we also need to ensure that we really give the impetus to private investment. We focus on the big area of jobs and livelihood, even as we aspire for much higher growth for many, many years. This budget has an opportunity to lay down the roadmap, not only for growth in 21-22, but for many years to come.
And Mr. Kotak, it will have to be done at a time, and at least when you look at the bond markets and you see the kind of charts that we are, inflation could be coming back. That's has to be said and discussed as well. We have a lower interest rate regime. You've had a flush of liquidity. You've seen jugalbandi between the government and the RBI, but that is going to be one problem that could surface.
I think we need a stable economy. We need stable interest rates. We have to ensure that the interest rates do not spike. I think the RBI has done a phenomenal job managing monetary policy in tune with the government. And I think the time has come for us, if we really want to get our act together and grow in the area of private investment. Number one, capacity utilization has to go above 75%. And at the same time, we need a stable interest rate and a tax regime. Thank you, Nayantara.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kotak, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.